Welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for August 21st, 2024. We will follow our standard approach, which is to go through the issue that was created in the TC repo. That's issue number 1607. Before we get started, are there any announcements that people would like to share?
I will release Node 20.17 right after this meeting. So yeah, that's it.
Okay.
And Node.js 22.7 that was supposed to be released yesterday will be delayed one more day because we found some errors on the system to some important packages like Undici. So we are going to fix that or drop the commit and attempt to release tomorrow.
Sorry, which one was that? That was 20.
22.7.0.
Okay, and then one, Marco, you're releasing is
20.7.
20.7.0. Okay, thanks. So that's great. Okay, any other announcements people would like to make? Okay, if not, our regular reminder to nominate people for the contributor spotlight. If you see somebody, a regular contributor making some, great contributions, please nominate them for the spotlight. In terms of updates from the CPC and board, I don't think there's any updates this week. We don't have either of our reps, so I'll say no updates. Which takes us to the issues on the agenda. The first one being lib symbol dispose should be enabled with an experimental flag. If anybody's involved in that one or tagged it, please jump in.
Yeah, sure. There are two issues related to this topic. The first one is whether we should add experimental warnings to symbol.dispose, because the whole ECMAScript feature is unfinished, and at the moment there's only symbol.dispose was exposed globally, but the whole feature is unfinished. So the first topic is whether we should add any experimental warning to symbol.dispose. The second topic is that for the long term, for the future, how do we handle experimental global API addition? Like discussed, this experiment feature should have been implemented in V8, and V8 have policies for experiment features that this should be hidden behind a flag when it's still unfinished, and it will be turned on by default when the whole feature is complete. So it left us into a situation where it might be possible that our polyfill is diverging from the underlying dependencies implementation. So the suggestion there could be that we apply Semver major for each experimental features exposed to the global scope, or we require a lazy PLC consensus for each experimental APIs exposed to globals. So yeah.
Like on this topic, I think about it since the TypeScript on decorators, which is something, it's a bit different, but it's on the same line of problem. So I wondered, why do we like polyfill like something that is going to be implemented by VA at all, or if it's something that we should do it like generally, because I thought about it, and like I think it's something that we should probably discourage it. And because like if we polyfill something, because yes, it's a spec, it has a spec and it's going to be implemented by V8, but if there is something that is slightly different, it's going to be a sample major change. And generally, I think we should be very cautious with like V8 polyfills in general, language polyfills. So like to answer your question, I think we should mark it as a sample major change for the future, and like have some discussion on, like some further discussion on this, because like if we did it for symbol dispose, we could also do it for decorators. But yeah, that's it.
Anybody else have any thoughts, comments?
Yeah, for Marco's comment that I can add something more is that for decorators, it is a little bit different because decorators are syntax and we don't have, I think it's literally impossible to polyfill syntax in our code base if we, yeah. So for current two topics, we are specifically talking about adding exposing APIs to the global scope, especially exposing experimental APIs to the global scope.
Benjamin has his hand up next.
Yeah, hi. So just to give a little bit of context, in the specific case of symbol dispose, Node only implements the bare minimum part of the proposal in order to let others like TypeScript and Babel build on top of it and implement the actual proposal. So we don't actually implement like the explicit resource management proposal. We only polyfill the symbol in order to allow interop and to allow tools to prototype and implement it. Now, in retrospect, I think I agree, and I think we have consensus that this sort of change, because it's cross-cutting and it affects Node in the context of other standards bodies and processes that like a single contributor isn't aware of, should go through the TSC. And I think Antoine's suggestion of it being like a sample major by default, so it requires like a lazy TSC consensus, is good. It supports our tooling, so I think in general, it's a good solution to the problem raised, and I think we should do it. As for the symbol dispose, if it was a year ago, I would have been 100% in favor of like an experimental warning. At this point, I don't think it's like useful anymore because it's already been there for a year. But in the future, or like if we change the polyfill, I am for adding a warning. That said, if I am like the one person who like prefers the trade-off this way, I will concede it. It's not like I don't think it's a huge deal either way. In the specific case of symbol dispose, however, in other cases it may be a huge deal, which is why I think like we can agree, maybe, unless someone thinks differently, that it should in general be semper major.
Anybody have any concerns over that sort of by default saying that, yeah, these kinds of things should be semper major?
So I totally agree with Benjamin on this specific topic. I think since like it's already been out for a long time, there's no action to take immediately. But for the future, like we should say that polyfills should be semper major changes.
Yeah, additional to, well, I agree that when it is exposed to the global scope, it must be a semper major. And I'm wondering that if it should be first go through a experimental flag, command line flag initially, so that we can reduce the chance that we have to well, I mean the feature can be trialed with a command line flag since it's still unfinished. So what if the feature can follow the current V8 process, like hiding behind the flag initially? So yeah, that's a additional idea.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying like if it's not complete, then it should also be under an experimental flag, right? Is that
Yeah, that's what I was suggesting.
okay? Antoine has his hand up.
So I assume if we use an experimental flag, that's not Semper Major, right? What would be Semper Major is to expose it without a flag globally.
If it's behind the flag, it doesn't need to be Semper Major, right?
Yeah, in that case, yeah, that sounds a good idea.
Yeah.
And I guess the TSC can always decide that it's not Semper Major on a case-by-case basis if needed.
Okay, so I'm just for the minutes. Oh, Benjamin, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, like, I think it's not a one size fits all. I think it really depends on what feature we're talking about. So in some cases, like maybe you want a flag. In some cases, maybe a flag isn't enough. In some cases, maybe we don't want a flag, which is why I think it should go through the TSC for context.
So I think what Benjamin is suggesting is like it should always go to the TSC. And our current approach of marking it Semper Major would do that, right? Like if we said by default it needs to be marked Semper Major, and then like if the TSC agrees, no, in this case it's like under the flag is fine, then it would go through, right? So like that would be an easy way to leverage our existing framework of getting it on the TSC's radar versus inventing something new. So, and Benjamin, let me know if that's not quite what you meant.
See what I meant.
Any other comments?
Just to clarify, that means we have consensus on requiring Semper Major.
Right. I think it basically, regardless of flag or no flag, it's Semper Major. Tag something on the global scope. And a polyfill would always be tagged as Semper Major. Then in the discussion from the TSC, we could adjust and say, well, okay, since it's under a flag, in this case, we don't think it needs to be, or so. Does that sound great to everybody?
I'm not sure we need this. I think if someone wants to make a feature behind a flag, like without involving the TSC, that should still be possible. Because I don't see what we're protecting against. We're just like adding more friction when it's not always necessary. So in my opinion, having an experimental flag should not be Semper Major, regardless if it's about polyfill or not.
So, like the concern here is like cross-cutting concerns. Let's say there is like a TC39 proposal, and someone polyfills that, but there is like politics or interpersonal stuff or like status updates for the repository, for the proposal that person is not aware of because they're like a collaborator, and it doesn't get escalated and it causes issues for the project. So that wouldn't be a problem with the compile time flag, but with the runtime flag, like it's the sort of problem I would rather avoid.
Any
Does
other?
that make sense to me to treat it as simple major? Well, I guess I would prefer if it was just an informal thing that it's a good thing to ping TSC on those PRs.
So the idea of semper major was like yours, like my understanding was that it was in order to facilitate the automation
Yes.
where the TSC gets pinged. But I think we can agree it's like TSC, like it's semper major by default, but it's expected that if there is a flag, the TSC will reduce the semperness. I am totally fine with that as like a middle ground.
So yeah, I mean, like it's not semper major in terms of like semver itself, and like we can release it in a minor, but I would say it is in terms of consensus because I think pinging TSC is required when changing, like when polyfilling. So like marking semver major would say, hey, ping TSC. Otherwise, I don't know how to like to make it TSC approval required.
It seems like the easiest way, and I suspect like this isn't going to happen all that often, right?
Not really. I guess once or twice per year for like for specifically T39 proposals.
Because yeah, I think making it just as an informal thing is like I don't think informal things really have much effect because somebody's got to know to do it. And I think Benjamin's concern is more about like somebody may not have all the context, so they may also not remember that they need to ping the TSC on something like that versus it is just always marked and then can be removed. That should be more effective.
It's true, but still, someone still remembers to add the semper major label. I guess I'm not opposed to have it always semper major if the understanding is the TSC will lower it to semper minor.
Yeah, okay. So we can basically say, so basically what we're agreeing is that like it will always, if I'm just taking the notes at the same time. Basically, we're agreeing that like, yeah, it'll always be tagged as semper major, but the expectation is that most of the time it would be removed, you know, for example, if it's behind a flag and that kind of stuff. Okay, so I think then I'll repeat what I think might be the consensus. It's just like consensus is that we will ask that polyfill, so it's basically polyfills on the global scope will always be marked as semper major. Start expectation is that TSD will remove after discussion in cases like the TSC will most often remove after discussion if it's behind a experimental flag. Is that?
I think it's not specific to polyfills. I think it's
Okay.
more about experimental APIs.
Okay. Okay, so I just updated this. A consensus that will ask that experimental APIs in the global scope will always be marked December major to start. Expectation is that the TSC will typically remove after discussion if it is behind an experimental flag. Does that sound right to everybody?
Sounds good.
Okay, I don't hear any objections so far. I guess Chinzong, you said there were sort of two questions. If we asked or answered both questions, I think that's the second one. And the first one, I've heard a few people say, well, like at this point, it's not necessarily worth doing anything. Does anybody have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the main ask will be the policy, the process in the future. And I've heard concerns adding experimental API, expand warning to simple dispose, and I think it's unlikely the simple dispose itself will break. So yeah, if people think it's not good idea to add an experimental warning at this time, I think we'll just go ahead to add the new experimental global API process to the document in another PR linked in the meeting issue. I will post the link in the chat. Yeah, this pull request. It's another pull request.
Okay, so we'll add experimental warning for future edition, right?
Not really. It will document the current consensus for future experimental global APIs in a separate PR. The PR link I post.
Okay, yep. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I see somebody put that in and starting some minutes there, so that's great. Okay, so I think yeah, those should be captured in the minutes now. Sounds like those are all things that like in terms of we'll have to will where would we document that the experimental APIs, those should go into like another PI or PR somewhere, I assume as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's linked in the note.
Okay, so you're gonna add that into 5.330, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like all the questions on that one have been asked. Sorry, answered, agreed.
Yep.
Okay, sounds good. I think that takes us to the end of the agenda because the conversion enterprise account is complete. Just before we close out, I want to make sure I have everybody on the agenda. I don't think I do, so give me a second. Go ahead.
I think Paulo wanted to raise another issue. There is a PR to add the sleep as an alias to set timeout for the promises version.
Yeah. Yeah, I added the TSC agenda, but I think it was too late for the bot to pick it up.
Can you just paste the issue in the chat so I can add it?
Yeah, give me a sec. Wait, find it. Okay, here it is.
Thanks.
So Fox, I couldn't find a consensus. I mean, nobody has really engaged with that PR, so I wonder if it actually matters to anybody. But I added that little alias as timer promises dot set timeout. The things that I find two issues. I mean, I personally experienced that firsthand, so I thought it might be beneficial for people. And anyway, it's just an alias. I'm not introducing any new function there. I found two main issues. First of all, is an obnoxious and repetitive tax that I usually don't like to use await set timeout, so I keep using await sleep. But this means that I always have to rename the import when I do the import or the require in whatever matters. That's the first issue. The second issue that I found that happens to me a couple of times and cost me a decent amount of minutes and several profanities basically is that if you import set timeout from promises and you forget about it for any reason, and then you use the set timeout function as is usually classically used, the classical callback base set timeout, it won't work because of course this is the promise version. And that's a problem because basically we are with this alias, we are encouraging people to overwrite the global, the standard set timeout function, and that might be confusing, honestly. So that's why I say, okay, let's introduce an alias so people actually use that alias. And I'm not saying that in the future I plan to also completely remove the set timeout for promises and just leave the sleep eventually in the future. But for now, don't go there. I think it's just a bad idea to encourage people to just overwrite a global, basically, by importing. I think it's also one of the few cases where you actually do that. So that was my take on that. Yeah, Ben?
Yeah, so my only concern is that we currently have like I think 4 or 5 ways to schedule timeouts, and this adds another way through like the alias. Like I like understand and like empathize with your concern. I would also prefer to write like sleep or delay and not set timeout every time. Because it's pretty common, but like my main concern is consistency. I want to ensure that like there are like the API as a whole doesn't become confusing.
If that's your only concern, I could actually choose to remove timer promises dot set timeout rather than aliasing. So we just basically keep the single one and we don't basically encourage users to overwrite the global eventually.
If there is interaction about it, I would also be okay with removing scheduler dot wait. Like if people aren't using that very much, and adding sleep instead of that, or like any other, like as long as the number of APIs to schedule timeouts doesn't increase, I'm fine.
Okay. Is up to you. Do we have any usage data, something about it on by any chance? Oh, thank you, Rafael. Oh no, Rafael, are you replying to me or the other thing on chat?
To one.
The other one, okay. Yes, but anyway, yes, sleep is synchronous API on other languages, which is something I also see that people say, oh, we might just create a sleep, asynchronous sleep function calling, using atomics. That also in that case is going to be blocking on the event loop, but I don't see why we want to do that on Node because it's completely out of our use. Basically, we almost never want to block the event loop, so I don't know. I wouldn't do that. Now, to address your question, Ben, if you want to keep the number of API the same, I can remove await. Sorry, timer promises dot set timeout and just leave it with sleep. I mean, I just renamed the function basically. If you prefer.
Isn't it stable though?
Let me check. I don't know. I don't remember, to be honest. Oh. So that's on 22. Let's see on 22. Timers. Timer promises API. Yes, in V16 graduated from experimental, so it's gonna be a semver breaking.
It will be 2 cycles at least of deprecation, right? 1 to runtime deprecate, one to remove and include. So if we really want to do that, we will release it on Node.js 25 or 26.
So how would it work basically? No, wait a sec. What are you talking about? The entire module or just the API?
The API, even if the API is stable, we first need to agree to doc deprecate. Then we go to runtime deprecate, which is Semver major. And then once it's land, we drop that version, drop that module or the API and include the new one. So at least 2 majors.
Oh, I see.
It also makes me wonder, like, is it really worth it? Like, there's already something that has 2 lines, like maybe it's just publicized that more as there's a way to do a sleep without using the set timeout that effectively this, like that scheduler.wait looks pretty intuitive to me, right? And it's not called sleep, but I admit I didn't know it existed. So I would have used the set timeout one. So like, but maybe that's more of a publicize that existing one versus introduce something new.
That's something I would also do. In that case, I would just, I mean, I also see that the scheduler is a standard API, so maybe it's just better. In that case, I would just say we should see if we can support the ref for the scheduler, which is something that we're currently lacking. And secondarily, I would really love to add a warning if you use timer promises.setTimeout with the callback because it's not supported.
That I think is a great idea. Like basically, so if you don't use a wait and it's going to do nothing, like emit a warning on that sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah, because that's, I mean, I don't really care about the aliases, it's just out of laziness and I leave out of my laziness. But the last case was actually what bothered me to create this PR because it's just nonsense, honestly. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so basically adding, yeah,
Okay, sounds fair.
Okay.
Is this if I add this warning to the API, is a somewhere mean or is a bug, or we consider bug fixing this in this case? Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter, but I'm just asking.
It's will depend on we were checking if adding warnings and things like that usually is a Semver major. But if we consider that as a bug fix or something, we can include in a Semver minor. It will depend on the agreement of our team.
I mean, in this case, I consider bug fixing. Because basically, what happens is that if you set timeout, which is a promise, first of all, you have an unhandled promise because you usually don't await that promise, first of all. And second, never resolves because, I mean, the callback is never invoked. It's just referenced, which is actually technical of memory leak because it's the resolved value of the promise, but it's not invoked.
And I assume that we know that they are calling the asynchronous version instead of the regular set timeout, the global one, because of the callback. It's called on C++, right?
Yes, because the theory is that the API for timer promises.set timeout is that you pass a value that you want to be returned after a certain result. I mean, you pass instead of the callback, you pass as a first argument the value that you want the promise to be resolved with after a certain timeout, which is unlikely to be a function, I guess. I mean, there is probably an edge case, but I would say it's unlikely.
Okay, okay.
Okay. Okay.
It seems reasonable from the discussion that the argument could be that it's like Semver minor, because I mean, there shouldn't be much code out there that would do that because it's not doing what you would want. So eventually probably people would figure that out and fix it anyway. So it shouldn't really be breaking for people. It's
unless we're discovering a bug for them, which is probably might happen. But yeah, I don't see that we are breaking anybody. I don't think it's very used API.
So I think it's one of those ones where like sounds like people think that's reasonable, but would be settled in the PR itself. I see Chenzong has his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to echo with the scheduler API naming that there's a active discussion on the experimental scheduler API because it's just a specification that only, I believe it's only Chrome implements. So there are still discussions around the naming of the scheduler API. So please comment there if you would like it to be renamed to scheduler sleep.
Okay, so this is in the WIC. Okay. Okay, any other discussions, comments?
Nope.
Okay, any other issues we should tackle before we close out for today? If not, well, thanks for everybody's time, and we'll see everybody in GitHub and next time. Bye.
Cheers, folks. Have a nice one.
No, I think